Oh boy. Well, here we have Symbiosis. This is one of those TNG episodes that is infamous for having Picard use the Prime Directive as an excuse. And in universe, Picard actually kind of sort of admits to it being an excuse, but not to the people that he's making the excuse to. So, what is the reason for such a thing? Well, now again, I'm doing this discussion as context of using this as a TTRPG item, which means that um, this is a very high level decision oriented thing, and thus trying to do this as a TTRPG module, you would have to delegate tasks that are nominally the captain's decision. However, you, the crew, will be going around acquiring information that the captain needs in order to make a decision. And that is something that you need to kind of like remember as like a general concept for this one, because ultimately the end is Picard's decision. However, it is up to his crew to acquire the information he needs in order to make a good decision. So let's go on to the plot. The Enterprise D is ex- ugh, investigating unusual solar flares and magnetic fields in the system. Blah blah blah. They find a Ornaran freighter that was damaged by the solar eruptions, and the bridge crew are perplexed by the fact that the freighter's crew apparently don't know how to fly their own ship. Why? Oh boy, that is the crux of the plot. And why this is such an interesting episode. One, the freighter's captain is apparently unable to articulate to the crew of the Enterprise what the problem is. He knows that there's a problem. He doesn't really seem to be able to properly put it into words. And Data is able to figure it out rather quickly and easily. And of course, the captain of the freighter doesn't really know what's going on or how to fix things, blah, blah, blah. And of course, one of the problems here is that the intense radiation means that a lot of the normal methodology is unworkable. This is actually a plot point that's very useful for a TTRPG because the reason the crew came here was the fact that there is an unusual solar activity in the system, and that unusual solar activity is limiting their options. And of course, the fact that everything that the freighter crew tries to do isn't working because the reason the freighter crew is in the problem that they're in is because of the fact that they have completely lost the ability to operate the freighter properly. And then we get to a very, very strange thing. The crew of the Enterprise is like, okay, we can't fix your ship. We need to do stuff to avoid your people getting killed. So here, we're going to do this thing to help you beam over to our ship. And instead of themselves, the crew of the Ornaran vessel transport over as part of their cargo. And now we get to the part of the episode where things really get fun. The Ornarans and the Brekkians have been interacting for years. And of course, the Ornarans and the Brekkians are also an interesting thing because the fact that the way that the episode describes them, they are functionally identical alien races. that are near human, but also have slightly enhanced abilities that a human doesn't. And again, it's one of those things where it's like a rubber forehead race, where these are actually something that does technically have makeup. It's just that it's such a subtle thing that's almost unnoticeable unless you actually pay attention and know exactly what you're looking for. One thing that's notable is that this little thing on the bridge of the nose is actually a slightly different shape. See, but the Ornarans and Brekkians have the same electrical abilities, which is a bit odd. But now this is something that's ascribed in the episode as being a effect of the solar system that they live in, and that is somehow causing the life forms in the solar system to have electrical fields that are more powerful than normally because they need it to protect themselves from their sun or something. Yeah, that's it's one of those things where they threw out a half-baked explanation, a very, very half-baked explanation, and didn't really think it through, if you know what I mean. Oh, and yeah, apparently it isn't something that actually worked out as well as they wanted it to. Yeah, we're not going to worry about that today. Anyway, though, now there was in fact a deadly plague somewhere over 100 years ago that the two races had to find a cure for, and Felicium was found on Brekka, which did seem to cure the plague. Here's the thing. One, we don't actually know what the plague was. The explanation currently in use for why Felicium is being distributed is that it uh, staves off symptoms of the plague. However, at no point in the episode do they actually explain what the plague was. Now, they do make the claim that the plague was real in the episode. However, the prob the specific reason why Felicium was able to cure the plague is completely unknown. Actually, it's not even clear whether the plague was actually cured with Felicium, or if Felicium is simply something that the Brekkians have been selling to the Ornarans for decades because the Ornarans don't actually know what the drug is or why it's having the current effect on them. See, that's the thing with this. Brekkian society is actually reasonably potent. They do genuinely have knowledge and technical skill. Now, their economy is at present fully dependent on Ornarans, but the exact nature of this dependency is kind of unclear because it seems an awful lot like the Brekkians are only getting money from the Ornarans, and it's not explained how. Again, it's one of those things where a commodity is being going from Brekka to Ornara. Money is going from Ornara to Brekka. We don't actually know what kind of money this even is, and so on and so forth. And the Ornarans don't actually seem to be capable of producing any useful woods at this point. So it's not entirely clear how the Brekkians are being compensated for the Felicium by the Ornarans. Also, the Brekkians have such a large percentage of their industry making Felicium because the Brekkians are making enough Felicium for a population that is probably several billion. Did they actually state what the population was? Planet Ornara. Let's see if this says what the population was. Because a lot of the time they just won't bother talking about planetary populations. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. And some of the times when they do talk about planetary populations, it's a giant red flag that something is really, really weird, like when the bow breaks. Their explanation of the population of the uh, formerly cloaked planet that was, the fabled paradise world was tiny, like a single real world city has more population than the entire planet did. Why? Because it was a colony world and did not actually have a race that was inhabiting the entire planet. The race living on the planet had a capital city and they never left it. And that was why the population of the planet was so small, and possibly also why they had so few resources in order to combat the problems they were having. At any rate, on to this one. Ornara and Breccia. The plague was said to be deadly, so it is possible that at that point in the past there was a significant reduction in the populations of the planets. It is possible that the Ornarans may have had like 90% or more of their population die off to the plague. We don't actually know. They didn't go into that much detail. However, if true, that would mean that in the past, the Brekkians didn't actually have reason to produce as much Felicium as they currently are producing. And the Ornarans' consumption of Felicium being lower would also mean that as time went on, the Brekkians had to ramp up production and find new and more expensive ways to produce even more Felicium than there is or was available when they first started making Felicium and selling it to the Ornarans. Now, this is another thing that's left ambiguous in the episode. What were the Brekkians using Felicium for before this event? Because one of the things we do know is that the version of Felicium that they're currently selling to the Ornarans is a version that has been refined so heavily that it is a functional narcotic agent, and thus something that the Ornarans have a physical dependency on because i- they've been taking it in large enough amounts that their bodies have become accustomed to having the drug in their bloodstream and just don't function right without it. And Crusher seemed to think that simply stopping taking it would make the symptoms go away, but it would take days or something. Whatever. The nature of this, though, is the part that's interesting. See, doing this as a TTRPG, obviously there is the ideal endpoint is to um, well, okay, one, doing this with the Ornarans and the Brekkians limits your options because of the fact that there's a story that's already been told. And that story that's already been told, either your crew is going to be following behind it, much like the Lower Decks episode where they go back to Ornara and look at things because of the fact that, well, the Federation wants to check in on them because it's been a while. The So your crew could be doing something along those lines. I mean, because it is a planet with what is functionally a civilization worth talking to for various reasons. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that while Captain Picard does invoke the Prime Directive, his explanation for why he's invoking the Prime Directive makes no freaking sense. However, if you go with the idea that he's just throwing something out there as a front because he doesn't want to tell the Ornarans the truth, and also doesn't want to confront the Brekkians about it. Because this is the part about the episode that got weird is that in the episode as aired, one of Picard's key decisions that he made, and an intentional, conscious decision, was to not reveal the nature of Felicium to the Ornarans. He didn't do it. The idea was that having the Ornarans run out of Felicium would cause them to um, have withdrawal symptoms, then get over it. And then, after they no longer have symptoms from Felicium, they would gain the ability to figure it out for themselves what was going on. Well, I personally suspect that the Ornaran civilization had, let's just say, a lot of turmoil and probably fatalities as a result of this. Because that's the part about the episode as aired that I personally found to be rather objectionable is the fact that Picard's like, well, I mean, it's the best we could do under such short notice, and as a Federation officer, I cannot personally take care of anything more detailed than this, so I'm just going to, do this and leave. Well, is quitting cold turkey actually the best option? They decided that it was an option they were going to pursue, but if they'd actually told the Arnarans what was going on, there would probably have been less chaos, shall we say. Anyways, though, that is part of the episode that's an interesting moral dilemma that your players might have a different solution for. And that is something that would be really, really fun to try out in a TTRPG, at least in my opinion. Another thing about this episode that's completely left out, what is the relationship of Ornara and Brekkia to their galactic neighbors? In fact, who are their galactic neighbors? See, this episode talks about the Ornarans and Brekkians in this context of them being warp-capable civilizations. In fact, that is the entire reason why Picard just like casually starts talking to them. They actually have a warp-capable freighter, but they don't um, have maintenance facilities that are actually still working because over time, due to the plague and the after effects of everyone taking Felicium constantly, probably at a dosage that's actually unsafe. Because that's actually one of those things with substances like that in the real world is that a certain amount will make you feel better, but not actually um, drastically impair your cognitive abilities. Well, the Ornarans were apparently taking enough Felicium that it was impairing their cognitive abilities, and that was actually the reason why they were having such severe issues with having their freighter actually work properly. Because, as they mentioned in the end of the episode, part of the reason why that freighter was having so many mechanical issues is that it was, in fact, the only one that still worked. The Ornarans had been having their fleet of ships break down a piece at a time, and they'd kind of lost the ability to keep them running. But this is not as simple as, the people who built them are now too befuddled to actually repair them. No, because of the fact that Ornarans are not stated to have a longevity that is unusual. So the people that are currently running the Ornaran freighters are descendants of the people or the descendants of the generation that built them. And no one prior to the start of the whole plague thing is still alive. It's been long enough since the plague hit that everyone who was a key member of Ornaran society prior to the plague that was cured by Felicium, uh, none of them are still alive. The only people that we currently have are second, third, maybe fourth generation descendants of them. Actually, I'm not even sure how long ago it was, so it might actually be more than that. People that are trying to do their best, but each successive generation, the knowledge base has grown corrupted and less effective. So they're being taught things by people who didn't fully understand things the first time. And thus, their ability to understand what they're doing is weakened. And that's an aspect of this that would be interesting to pursue because of the fact that, in theory, someone who is a competent Federation engineer, as mentioned in the televised episode, would be able to go onto one of the Arnaran ships and be like, ah, yes, here, let's just rearrange all of these parts into something that actually works. Because the fact that the Ornarans were doing such poorly thought out maintenance that they didn't even remember how to do it right. Because the people who taught them weren't doing it right. And so on and so forth. Anyway, though, the Brekkian aspect of this is actually more interesting to me than the Ornarans because the Brekkians knew that Felicium was a dangerous narcotic, or could be used as a dangerous narcotic if the dosage was too high. That's an interesting thing about this is that it, it again, it's never explained the nature of the plague. It's not explained how Felicium cured the plague. It's not even clear if the Brekkians are actually telling the truth when they say that Felicium is what they used to cure the plague. We know that the plague was real. We know that the plague did, in fact, kill a whole bunch of people. And we know that the Brekkians did something to cure the plague. We're not actually 100% sure if the drug that the Brekkians are currently selling to the Ornarans is, in fact, the same thing. In fact, I believe was actually one-off liner in the episode where the um, Brekkians actually stated that the current version of Felicium was an improved formula that was more effective than the original. What exactly that means, we don't know. But it would be something that would be interesting to explore at a TTRPG, I think. But one thing that you could do is just do like a, shall we say, modified version of the scenario. And instead of actually using the Ornarans and the Brekkians, use a different pair of races. And that way you could tweak the details so that it's not exactly the same. One, if it's a player who has actually seen this episode and you actually try to do the episode straight up as aired, they're going to see every single plot beat coming because that's one of those things is that in theory you could reenact this episode, but for to make a good TTRPG story, you need to do something that isn't transparently obvious. And if you're copying an episode and the players remember the episode you're copying, they're going to be like, "Oh, that. Okay, then. Yeah, sure. I'll just push the button to make it go." And when you're writing a scenario for a TTRPG, preventing the players from knowing where the make it go button is a large part of designing it. And with that, I will leave you because this is a fun idea for a TTRPG module. It really is. The Ornaran race is actually something that you could use for a lot of things that aren't actually this scenario because of the whole thing. I was like, having the ability to discharge harmful electrical fields is actually a rather potent superpower. And every single one of them can do it, both the Arnarans and the Brekkians. Yeah, there's actually that clip of one of the Ornarans fighting a Brekkian, and they're trying basically just electrocuting each other. It's not working because it's equal voltage, but you know, well, also is that one of them because he's an Ornaran is actually kind of sort of not in his right mind. Does that help him or hurt him? Good question. However, the Brekkian doesn't appear to be suffering as much. So, good question. Anyway, though, that's enough of that. Two different things that are very, very interesting about this episode. The nature of the race, cool, very cool race. The morality thing, really, really interesting. Trying to do new things with this would be a great thing for TTRPG. See you guys next time.